actual world governments got established was not by a bunch of people all signing the contract. The way they got established was by, as David Hume puts it, usurpation and conquest. That is, like in the history of every government, there's a time when, either somebody took over the government, like in a coup, or somebody just one tribe of people conquered another tribe. Something like that. That's how government started. So, they didn't start by literally everyone in the society agreeing with them. And by the way, if you tried to do that, obviously, you would never get an agreement. So you could get a majority of people to agree to something. Like maybe a majority of people would agree to be ruled by Donald Trump, but there's no chance of getting unanimous agreement on anything that's useful.
Okay, yeah. So what if, let me hit you from a different angle, because I've argued with these people, especially when I was in college and grad school. I used to spend more time doing this. There's, I don't know how much you've been interacting with like anarcho-socialists, and they think that term's redundant, and now if you're an anarchist, you gotta be socialist. What if they would say, oh my gosh, Professor Humer here, you're talking about because the workers signed a labor contract. Well, that's only because of the unjust distribution of so-called property titles, which itself was not due to consent going back eons. There was all kinds of bloodshed and conquest and violent expropriation. People who were working the land, and then some outsiders came in and used, in conjunction with the state, to force them off and now say, hey, we're the owners, we're the landed gentry, and da-da-da-da. So what are you talking about? The only reason the workers right now, quote, agree to these labor contracts is because of historical injustice that was certainly not consensual. So it's the same kind of thing. So how would you respond to something like that?
Well, there's a couple of issues there. Yeah, okay. So, one issue is how should we address historical injustices? You might say like every piece of property that exists today has like an unjust history behind it, right? Because like, all of the land that's occupied was probably stolen at some time in history. Mm-hmm. And then it was passed down from there, and it doesn't matter what happened after that. Whatever happened after that, it's not a legitimate title. And then all other material objects were created by taking resources from the land, so nobody owns anything. Okay, but you're like, what conclusion is this supposed to lead to, right? Like, this is supposed to lead to socialism? I don't see how. Like, okay, so, like, the typical thing that people, I guess, conclude is, that means that the state gets to just, like, take anything it wants. No. That doesn't mean that the state owns anything, right? But so, what the solution is to historical injustice is, it's not that somebody just gets to declare that now they can take anything and give it to anyone. Right? Which is like what the state is doing. Okay, but then if you're an anarcho-socialist, I don't understand how that's supposed to be a solution to this. Like, so now what? So now the workers own everything? Like, how is that? They don't have a legitimate title either. Anyway, like the main problem I have with anarcho-socialism is, there are many problems. Anyway, like one of the more obvious problems is, suppose that you establish the anarcho-socialist paradise. Suppose everything is, just you wave a magic wand and suddenly everything gets to be just the way that the anarcho-socialists want. So all of the businesses are turned into worker cooperatives, I guess. Right? The state disappears and like all of the capitalists have given up. Okay, then what happens? Well, then they would just convert it to a capitalist society, right? Because there are these workers who collectively own these businesses. Workers can sell their shares in the business. They can do that because there's no one to stop them from doing that because there's no government, right? And like the workers could just vote to do that. And why would they do that? Because if they sell their shares of the business, then they get money now, and they eliminate risk, right? Because like if you're an owner of a business, then you're at risk of losing your stake because the business could fail, which frequently happens. So if you're risk averse, or if you have time preference, you might want to sell your share of the business to somebody who has more risk tolerance or lower time preference. And there's no one to stop that from happening because you're in an anarchist society. So some workers would sell their shares, and then some capitalists, like people with lower time preference or whatever, would buy the shares. And then you just reestablish capitalism. The initial distribution is, So like maybe there needs to be some redistribution to correct for the historical injustices, but after you did that, you'd still wind up with capitalism.
Hey folks, let's take a break from the action to talk about our sponsor for today, Monetary Metals. Now we all know the dollar's losing value because of inflation. And we all know that owning gold protects your wealth from eroding away. But one of the biggest objections to owning gold is that it just sits there. There's no yield. It doesn't pay you any interest or dividends. In fact, you have to pay fees to store and insure it. But what if you could actually earn interest on gold? Well, that's exactly what Monetary Metals offers. With Monetary Metals, you can earn between 2% to 5% on your gold and silver every year. And if you're an accredited investor, you're eligible to earn even higher yields. But how does it work? How are they able to pay interest on gold? And let me say, folks, this part of their business model, it took me a bit to understand. After all, I thought, it's not like physical gold bars turn into more gold bars a year later. So how could they reliably promise you a return denominated in physical gold? Well, here's how it works. Monetary Metals connects you and your ounces with companies that need physical gold inventory for their business, such as jewelers, mints, refineries. And Monetary Metals lets you rent your gold to these qualified businesses. Now, in a more conventional arrangement, a jeweler, for example, might buy raw gold at its market price, fashion it into necklaces, rings, and so on, and then down the road sell the finished products. But this more conventional model involves risk for the jeweler, because the price of gold can drop in the interim, meaning they won't be able to sell the necklaces, rings, and so on for what they originally forecasted. If they had relied on a loan, quoted in dollars, to finance their initial purchase of the raw gold, they might be unable to pay back their creditors. But with Monetary Metals on the scene, there's another option. Now, these businesses get the gold they need to use in their own business without being exposed to gold price risk. The jeweler, for example, borrows the raw gold at the start and promises a markup in physical gold. Then, no matter what happens to the spot price of gold, the jeweler's built-in margin, from transforming raw gold into earrings, rings, and so on, kicks in and allows him to pay back his loan after the final sale. The jeweler benefits, and you get to put your gold to work for a regular monthly income in gold. It's a win-win. Now, when I say interest on gold paid in gold, I mean it. It's actually paid in ounces of gold. For example, let's say you start out with 100 ounces and the interest rate is 3% annual. That means you will be earning 3 additional ounces of gold every year, regardless of what the spot price of gold does during the year. You just watch your total gold ounces grow every month and leverage the power of compound interest, but measured in ounces of physical gold and silver. So let's recap. Why would you earn interest in dollars, which are constantly losing value, when you can earn interest in gold? Go to www.monetary-metals.com/Murphy to learn more, or to get started opening an account. In case you're wondering, I've opened an account with them myself, and my gold is now growing more gold at Monetary Metals. So again, go to monetary-metals.com/Murphy to get started growing your gold too. Okay, let's get back to the show. So, I guess is there another like popular, maybe not so much like what the layperson would say, but like in this literature of political philosophy, I guess is that the term I want to use? What other, besides just saying like the contract theory of government or social contracts, like are there other popular justifications for why political authority is legitimate?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. So, you hit the two most popular things that people appeal to: democracy, and then they appeal to the social contract theory.
Mm-hmm.
The third most popular thing is people just talk about how useful the government is. So, most people think that anarchy would be a complete disaster, and it would just be like people killing each other in the streets and, eating each other or whatever.
Or we'd get invaded by a neighbor that had a government, and they would just take us over. So we're getting a government anyway, might as well be ours.
Yeah, then you wind up under a dictatorship, which is worse than the current system. So, they point out that government is really useful, and then that is somehow supposed to lead to their authority. Okay, so like here's an analogy. We're all sitting on a life raft, and the life raft is taking on water, and it needs to be bailed out. And for some reason, most of the passengers are not doing it. Right? And like you tell them, look, hey, we need to bail out the water, or we're all going to die, and they're still just sitting around. So you take out your gun and point it at them and say, bail out the raft. Okay, and then then they bail out the raft, and everybody survives. Okay, so now that's supposed to be analogous to government.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like the government is the guy with the gun, and they're forcing people to do what's necessary to prevent the complete disaster for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems justified. All right, sound good? Okay, so like okay, so that's sort of supposed to be a defensive authority. Now, what's the problem? There are a few features that political authority is supposed to have that this doesn't explain. Right? So, imagine that the guy with the gun, after making people bail out the boat, he also says, oh, by the way, like, you've got this like a diamond necklace. I want it. And then, just takes it away. And then like, I'm going to give it to another passenger. And then, hey, you're drinking some alcohol there. That's not good for you. I'm going to grab that. Okay. And then, there's this one passenger who the guy thinks is a little shady, and he says, hey, throw that guy overboard. They throw him overboard. Okay. All right. So, is that all justified? No, none of that is justified. Okay. Well, all of that is also analogous to the stuff that the government does, right? And having authority means that they get to do a bunch of stuff that they decide, right? Because they decided that these things should be done. They get to do them even if they're not objectively necessary, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think that's part of the inherent common sense notion of authority, right? But there's no good explanation of why you get to do those things.
Okay, so again, you're just pushing you to try to get exactly what your position is. So I can imagine some people saying, you're right, some of the more sweeping visions of what the government or the state ought to do are completely unjustifiable for the reasons you're citing. But what about like reading like a Bastiat or a Thomas Paine or even a Ludwig von Mises, where they're coming from is there are some core functions that they thought the government has to do, and like the way Bastiat certainly would ground it is just people starting with their natural right of self-defense, and they just cede that to a group that's more capable of enforcing it or protecting it or validating those rights. And then, that raises some issue of taxation. And then I think like somebody like a Mises would just say, right, it's a thorny problem, but the government needs revenue. And so, yes, given that the government is absolutely essential to provide courts and police for property right protection and then to repel foreign invasion from outside armies, you need some revenue to do that. And yes, you got to have some taxation. But beyond that, no, the government shouldn't go beyond those bounds, and it shouldn't tax for redistributive purposes or social. It should just be the bare minimum, to fund these necessary functions. And you can wring your hands all you want, but if it doesn't do that, you're going to collapse or be taken over anyway. So it's kind of a silly argument.
Yes.
So to answer your question, if it really were the case, the people are sitting around and the raft is sinking and someone had to pull a gun to get them to do it, yes, that would be justified. And then if the guy got drunk with power and started abusing it, you could say you're not justified in doing that, but you were justified in pulling the gun to get us to bail the water out. And if someone wants to argue, no gun ever, then we would all be dead right now because we would have drowned.
Yeah. So, there are two parts to my book and to the overall argument, right? And so the first is about the authority of the state, and the second is about how anarcho-capitalism would work better. So just the notion of authority, as I understand it, is that the state is entitled to do a bunch of stuff that would otherwise be rights violations, and they don't have to justify everything that they do. Like, they're entitled to enforce laws, even the laws that are not in fact good ideas. Some people refer to this as content independence. They get to enforce the law, and it's not dependent on the specific content of the law. Okay, so and I'd just like to maybe convince yourself that this is part of the notion of authority. The notion of having authority is the notion of being above the other people in a certain sense, right? Like, you get to command them. Okay, and the guy in the life raft doesn't in fact get any authority. So like anybody, so if the life raft is in danger of going under and everyone is going to drown, then anyone has the right to force people to bail out water or do what it takes to get the boat bailed out. So after that guy, the one guy forces everyone to bail out water, that doesn't prevent anyone else from forcing people to bail out water. That doesn't prevent anyone else from forcing him to bail out water. So the guy who's forcing other people, you can also force him to bail out the water, right? And also, it doesn't give him the entitlement to just make rules just because he thinks it's a good idea, right? To make rules that are not objectively necessary, right? So like, there's no sense in which that guy now has a superior moral status to anyone else, right? And so he doesn't in fact get authority. Okay, and so now in the first part of the book, I argue that, so if the government doesn't have authority, then the result of that is libertarianism. Because, the libertarian philosophy is just that the government shouldn't do any of the things that we wouldn't want anyone else to do. Now, if you're a minimal state libertarian, then you think it's okay for the government to do certain things, but those are only the things that would be okay for anyone else to do. So the government can stop, they can prohibit murder and theft, right? But also, like, that doesn't give them a superior moral position to anyone else. Like, anyone has the right to stop murderers and thieves, right? Or, so I think.
Right.
Okay, and then, so like, by rejecting authority, you're supposed to get to libertarianism, at least minimal state libertarianism. And in order to get to anarchism, then you need to realize that actually the state isn't necessary to prevent the breakdown of social order, which is, a longer argument, which, I know you're familiar with. But, you just have to make the argument that there's another way of having social order.
Yeah, so I mean, even there when I was trying to steelman it and presented the views of like a Thomas Paine or a Bastiat or a Mises, a critical link in their claim was that we need something what we call the state or the government to provide police protection and courts and a military, because otherwise it's game over. And so that's part. So it's almost like I don't know, technological is not the right word, but yeah, it's just a theory of how the world works, that this empirical fact maybe that they were just mistaken about. And so if you could just show them that just like if they thought for whatever reason that only the state could teach kids how to spell, you might say, so therefore we need public schools, because otherwise without people knowing how to spell, what are you going to do? And then to just say, but no, you could have private education. Well, then that would be kind of important. If someone really believed kids can only learn how to spell through state-sponsored teachers, that would be, in our view, erroneous view that would color their view of political authority.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, just like think about the socialist societies, right, where they thought the state should provide everything, all goods, right? How did that work out? That didn't work out very well. And so, there's some areas in our society where goods are just standardly provided by the market only. Then there's some cases where the market and the state provides them. Like there are private schools and there are public schools. And then there are things that are only done by the government. Okay. The things where the things that are provided by the market, like we know that the market is better because we can compare our society to the socialist countries, right? And I mean the actually socialist countries,
Right.
where the government actually controlled all capital, not the quote socialist countries where there's still private ownership of capital.
Right.
Okay. Anyway, so
Scandinavian like welfare state kind of thing that people call socialism.
yeah, private people are still running the companies. So okay. Anyway, so like it works out better when the private people run the companies. Okay, and then what about cases where like in our society we still have both government and private actors providing the thing like education? Well, there the private schools are generally considered to be better, right? Or you have UPS versus the post office, and most people think UPS is better. And so okay, and then you come to these things that we haven't tried private provision of, like police protection. Well, I mean, why would you think that just in these areas where we only have the government doing it, these are the only areas where actually government provision is better than private provision?
Right. And what's funny is it's not like the leftist progressives in the United States are very happy with the police in general. Like, no, they think that that's a terrible institution, riddled with racism and so forth.
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
And like the progressives are largely mistaken. That is, the police are not as racist as they're saying, but they do periodically kill people, and in America they kill people more often, than the police in other countries. You know any private company that does that? Do you ever hear any cases of security guard brutality, like private security guards just beating the shit out of people, or just like killing unarmed people? I don't hear any of those stories. Why is that? Because there's competition, and they will lose business to their competitors who don't kill people unnecessarily, right? But the police can keep doing that, and they can keep their jobs because tax money, so they don't have any choice but to do that.
And the public too, if people post videos of some cop clearly, using excessive force, and say, oh well, next time someone's breaking into your house, I guess you're just gonna, call the pizza guy, huh? Well, you're saying if it's private security, if you get food poisoning at Wendy's and you complain about it, no one's gonna say, oh well, next time you're hungry, I guess you're just gonna go eat a plant. Like, no, I'm allowed to be mad at a particular company. It's not that it's all food.
We'll eat a plant, but
well, sure. So I should eat a rock. How's that? Okay, so can I, just with the time here, so I want to hit two things, so just to have Michael, I'm thinking in terms of transition, so we'll hit that, and then the last thing I'd like to do is just to see how does your approach differ, like I know you rely on intuitionism, and just to see how does that differ from like a standard Rothbardian approach, if that's okay if we can do that. So first, someone might say, okay, yeah, I get what you're saying, but what does that mean in practice? Suppose most people reading can say, nobody likes the government the way it is right now, but if we all just try to be anarchists next Thursday, it would be worse than it is right now. And so what do you propose we actually do about it in the meantime?
Yeah. So, we need to make a gradual transition. Like the first step should be, the government should start outsourcing some of its, so-called minimal state activities. So they should start outsourcing the policing, meaning get private security guards to provide security instead of the government police. Individual neighborhoods or even individual apartment buildings should choose the security guard company. There has to be competition, right? And just to be clear, because I don't know, sometimes people misunderstand this, like I'm not saying like private company automatically good, right? Like if you give a monopoly to a private company, then they're going to act like monopolies, like they're going to be animals. Okay, so the key difference isn't like, oh, is it government versus private? The key difference is monopoly versus competition. The problem with the government police is they're a monopoly. Okay, so we need to get like just individual small areas to choose their own security guard companies, where there should be multiple different security guard companies, and then just like get them to doing more and more of the job and shrink the police departments. Okay,
so that's interesting. Just to be clear though, so you actually think that's something that should be at the front of the list, as opposed to, oh well, first let's roll back the stuff that's violating the U.S. Constitution. That's easy, and then maybe down the road we'll start getting even more radical and privatizing police. Like you think, start privatizing the police right away?
Well, I mean, I don't know exactly what the priority is, but like, these things are not in competition, right? We can deregulate business and also start privatizing the police at the same time. Probably wouldn't, neither of them would probably make it harder to do the other one. The other thing is, but I'm saying this because like, a bunch of people could easily see how you could cut back regulations, but don't see how you could do away with the police competition, right? We can deregulate business and also start privatizing the police at the same time. Probably wouldn't, neither of them would probably make it harder to do the other one. The other thing is, but I'm saying this because like, a bunch of people could easily see how you could cut back regulations, but don't see how you could do away with the police, right? So just trying to explain how you could go further than people realize, right?
Right.
And then,
well, can I ask you just on that? You might remember a few years ago, like the defund the police was real big, particularly like on the left.
I remember.
Were you on board with, like, were you trying to just steer them in the right direction, or because a lot of people, even like a lot of Rothbardians I know, were like, oh yeah, a bunch of pinkos, and I didn't take that tag. Whether I did like point to my work and say, hey, if you guys are serious, here's, I've written on this. This is how you could actually defund the government police.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, did you try to latch onto that and do anything with it, or?
Well, I mean, I was saying, hey, why don't we privatize them? Privatize this stuff. Like, I don't know exactly what the defund the police people meant. I mean, like, it sounded like maybe they thought, yeah, we'll just like cancel that and have no security.
Right.
Like, what are you thinking? Right. But I did try to get some mileage out of it in favor of privatization. I don't know if anyone listened to me.
Well, what's interesting too is for some of that things, I would try to push it and say, if we can just agree that we're not going to have state-run police agencies like in Chicago, then that's really all you would need, because whether they're for private police or not, if, in other words, how would the state stop companies from going in and sending guys with body armor and stuff to be private police enforcement if there's no Chicago PD to arrest those guys and say, you can't do that, we're the cops. So it is a little bit like, even though it doesn't really matter what our visions are, if we could agree, and in practice, I think this, like some of them, when they said defund the police, all they really meant was reduce the police budget slightly to free up money for social service spending. They didn't actually mean disband the police, because we still want to be in charge. If somebody's doing something we don't like, we do want to send the cops in to shut them down. So we need the police.
Yeah, I mean, some people were saying we just meant to reduce their budgets, okay? But then there were other people who were saying, no, we mean literally abolish the police. There was a New York Times opinion piece with that title. Yes, we mean literally abolish the police. So anyway, I don't want, I don't think this transition could occur immediately. Like, I think, because you need to build up the alternative institutions at the same time that you're reducing the existing ones. If the government institution just disappeared, like the police just immediately disappeared, then there would be total chaos. We need to have this thing where, we start offering, maybe contracts for private security guards to do security in this particular area, and so that, they build up their capacity and their experience in doing the job, right? The related thing is, we need to privatize the court system. So there are private arbitration firms, which you can go to now if you can get the other party you have a dispute with to agree, to go to private arbitration. And I think the government courts should just start referring more and more cases to private arbitrators. Like initially, the government would probably, they'd have a list of private arbitrators that operate in this area, and then they would, somebody tries to file a lawsuit, they would go, hey, here's a list of private arbitrators, you guys agree on it, right? And then maybe they could just have more and more cases handled that way. And, I think even criminal cases should be handled by private arbitrators. Because, every court case is, in a sense, a dispute. There's a dispute between a plaintiff and a defendant, or somebody's accused of a crime and they claim they didn't do it, then there's a dispute between whoever accused them and the person who's saying they didn't do it. So, and then, they should agree on a private arbitrator to go to. Right? And then, so, eventually you could have the police and the courts privatized. Right? And then there's not that much left of the government. Then there's the legislature, right? And then, and basically I think that the legislative law should be replaced with common law. So, which is judge-made law, which but, just for the audience, laws made by judges making decisions in cases where people had a dispute. And so the judge gives a decision, then he gives his rationale for the decision. And then that rationale becomes a precedent for future cases. And so it becomes a kind of law.
Out of curiosity, I know when I was looking at this stuff years ago, when I stumbled upon the distinction between law and legislation, I know Hayek stressed that, and that even in earlier societies, they believed in law, but they thought they discovered it. It wasn't that the political the rulers of the tribe or whatever could declare murder to be wrong. Murder was illegal, it was a crime, and they could enforce it, but it wasn't like it was illegal because the people in charge said so. They viewed it as a...
Thank you for choosing Burger King.
And plus fight the fire. That team that volunteered that went back in there to fight that fire, probably saved that building because the fire department wasn't able to get in. That's why they asked us to volunteer to go back in and use the building systems to fight it and everything. Eventually, about 5 o'clock, we got ordered out because the fire department was able to get into the courtyard. And once I got out, I was walking over to where the on-scene commander was stationed to see what they needed me to do if I could get released to go home that night. And I spotted engine parts and aircraft parts that I recognized, actuators, those kind of things, all along the path that I was walking outside of the building. And the aircraft was really low, so it struck
70 people that are under observation there. We have some news coming out about the fact that in Michigan, in my worldview report, tonight. News at 7 o'clock Central. The radical Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, I guess some of her agencies, her health department agencies, now have a radical plan. They're ready to put into place related to poultry and farmers and farm workers and cattle. And I believe that if you were to carry out a pandemic, what would you choose that could check all the boxes? And I think the bird flu checks a lot of boxes, getting people afraid to drink milk. They're talking about it being in unpasteurized milk, I guess, last week. They'll get people afraid of milk. Get people afraid of eating meat. They get people afraid of consuming eggs and chickens, etc. This is a great way, I think, to destroy what they already want to destroy. The World Economic Forum, these guys, many of these people pushing the whole vax thing. That some of them are already investing in synthetic meat companies and whatnot. So it seems to me like this helped accomplish the goal of getting